Big question, what country will Trump declare war on to save himself? Now, this is a horrible big question. I know that we shouldn't really be thinking about this, but I think Trump is very cognizant of the fact that no president has ever been denied a second term while a war is going on, okay? And I think he's going to look at that and think the only time his approval ratings go up is when things like a strike on Syria happen or whatever else. He gets tough and, macho. And we got to look at, like, if he wants a second term, which I think he does, and if he wants people to quit talking all this shit about him, he may start a war to influence people. And what countries is he most likely to do that to? Now, I think the smart money's on Syria or North Korea. Syria is a war that's been raging forever, and people are sick of it, they're tired of it, and they have to look at, like, okay, it started out as this conflict between the Free Syrian Army and Assad. And then it morphed into ISIS came in and started taking over all this stuff. And then it was the Free Syrian Army and Assad and ISIS. And then it morphed into Iran and Russia started coming in. And there was Iranian kill squads with Assad's troops and Russian advisors and ISIS and the Free Syrian Army, and the United States gets involved and starts backing the Free Syrian Army till we find out that they have links to Al Qaeda. So then we try to fund a separate version of the Free Syrian Army, which I think wound up producing like 4 battle ready troops or something like that. I mean, it was like less than 10 people that were battle ready. Then the Kurds, we find, are always there. They're always, wanting freedom and can't get it. So they're willing to back them up. We start backing them up. Turkey doesn't like the Kurds, so Turkey gets involved. France and the United States is now backing the Kurds. Turkey hates them. They're trying to wipe that out. Slowly but surely, ISIS is pretty much defeated. You've now got 8 different people talking about we're all killing ISIS. Turkey, Russia, Iran, Assad, U.S., France, Kurds, Free Syrian Army. They're all fighting ISIS, quote unquote. ISIS is like 5 people at this point. But they're really killing each other. It's an 8-ton clusterfuck that has changed and metastasized about 5 different ways. Now Turkey's back in the Free Syrian Army, and Assad and the troops that should be against the Kurds, they've now made an alliance of convenience. It's a mess, okay? So it might be a good place for the United States to step in, but I think Trump looks at that clusterfuck and says, hell no. I mean, this is like Iraq times 50 for a country that is not as big, not as powerful, doesn't matter. I mean, he could change his mind because he changes his mind all the time. He makes no fucking sense. He could change his mind and say 100,000 troops to Syria, but I don't think that's. I don't know. You never can place money on what Trump's going to do, but to me, it doesn't seem like the smart play at this point. So we got to look at North Korea. Now, North Korea's getting nuclear weapons. And I think that people are afraid of that. I think people are afraid that it would turn into a conflict between us and China because that's very obvious that China is Kim Jong-un's master. It's very obvious that that's who's backing them up and tells them what to do. When Kim Jong-un said, okay, I'll meet with Trump, a week after that, and a week after Trump had placed tariffs on China, Kim Jong-un goes to China for a spontaneous trip. He hasn't been outside the country since he's been the leader of it. But he all of a sudden goes to China to be their bitch boy and be like, get a talking to or whatever. So I don't know. I think Trump and I think that they'll probably work out some kind of deal, some kind of temporary deal. I don't really see a war with North Korea. Then you got Iran. Now, Iran's a favorite of John Bolton's and all these neocon type people that Trump said he wasn't going to be like. He said that the Iraq war was a mistake and Bush was an idiot and all these old dumbasses don't know what they're doing in the Republican Party. That's now the type of people he's surrounding himself with. I don't know if people have noticed that. I think he's doing that because he's afraid. He's afraid that if he doesn't have the military, he doesn't have anybody. So I think he's only doing that because that's evangelicals in the military. The neocon base is now his base. He doesn't have anybody else. And Iran could be definitely on the table. I would put more money on Iran than North Korea at this point, which is stupid. The majority of Americans do not want it. The majority of Congress would not support it. But he's done stupider shit before. Now, a dark horse that I think people should really look at Venezuela, okay? Because when we think about presidents and starting wars, you got to think about what hits them personally. What jives with their philosophy? With Bush, okay, he hated Saddam Hussein. He embarrassed his father in some kind of way, or so he thought, so he had to get revenge. He just didn't like Iraq, even when 9/11 happened. Remember Richard Clark? He said, okay, 9/11 happened, and Bush is like, okay, so how can we get Saddam? He goes, but Iraq had nothing to do with this. And he said it didn't make any difference. Rumsfeld and Bush and all them, it was all about, we'll go to Afghanistan for a little bit, we'll be there, but how do we get to Iraq? That's what they really cared about. With Barack Obama, he favored drone wars and different things like that. When Syria broke out, he was very, very reluctant to do anything about it because, you know, Obama's people say that his feelings lied a little bit more with Iran than like Saudi Arabia and Israel. Now, Saudi Arabia and Israel, they wanted Assad gone because he was Iran's puppet and they wanted that, but Obama was very reluctant to really do anything about it. He didn't want to send troops. He didn't want to invest a lot of time and energy. If he had been more aligned with traditional, you know, neocons in terms of like Israel and Saudi Arabia, that's the way to go. What they want to do, we'll do it for them. He probably would have, or Assad probably wouldn't be there. But he just didn't think it was worth pissing off Iran while he was trying to do a nuclear deal. But again, that was like his personal preferences and his feelings that Iran wasn't as big a threat as the Republicans had been saying. So once you think about how presidents, their ideology or their personality or whatever influences that, who does Trump hate more than anybody? Mexicans. Are more worried about Latinos than anything else. He talks about Muslims and talks about black people. He don't like them either, but he's most worried about the Latino majority taking over the United States. His base is worried about that. I call it Mexistentialism. Okay, this existential dread of becoming a minority in your own country and Mexicans taking over. In Europe, they've got Mexistentialism with Muslims. Okay, I think Trump is very locked in that mindset, and Venezuela has got everything he needs. It's a war with Latinos. It's a war with a country that has hated the United States for decades. It's an unstable country. They might have a civil war break out any day now. I don't know how Nicolas Maduro has held on as long as he has. There's huge currency inflation. He's extremely unpopular. There's poverty everywhere. If it weren't for Russia and a couple of other antagonistic countries bailing them out, they wouldn't be anywhere anyway. There's the Petro, which is their version of Bitcoin, which is now the only state-sponsored cryptocurrency, and they made that to kill the dollar. They want to hurt the dollar in oil transactions and things like that. Maduro's certainly no friend. He's a very weak government. I think somebody like Trump, especially with Bolton in his ear and different advice or something, could think, well, if a civil war breaks out, it would be a good way to have a quick war, depose an unpopular government, just as Obama did in Libya or whatever, you know, and that I know Republicans think that was a big failure. They're like, look at Libya for Obama. Well, it wasn't really a failure, okay? Muammar Gaddafi and his military at that time is a way bigger threat to us than a failed state where 50 fucking warlords are fighting over the country. Somehow we got that Libya lie in our heads that a failed state that terrorists can fight amongst each other is worse than a active, antagonistic, hostile government which can coordinate real cyber attacks. And Gaddafi had been doing terror attacks on America since the 70s. So I think Trump may look at that and he might think this is a good way to shore up the base. It's a good way to put it into a civil war. Now, all that prefaces on a war already existing in Venezuela and sending troops into something that already exists, stabilizing the country. Look at Syria. The country's entirely unstable. All the refugees flood into Europe. It destabilizes all of Europe. Venezuela, something like that happens. All the South Americans flood up into Central America, which eventually trickles into the United States. We're not going to let it decentralize us the way that Syria did Europe. So, dark horse might be Venezuela. The smart money might be on Syria.